Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pandemic Interviews. Thanks for joining me. I'm Stephen Fick, and with me today is Brian Stokes. And
Hello,
Brian
everyone.
is the gentleman I go to when I have questions about Fiore. He's done so much studies with the manuscripts, but instead of me touting who he is and what he does, we're going to hear it from him. So thank you for joining me, Brian.
Indeed.
So first off, what
Thanks
I
for the
want to
invitation.
when
I'm
did you
sorry?
start your study of martial arts?
Where did I start my study of martial arts? Well, I started when I was 16 years old, long before you were born. Uh, let's see. I started doing Taekwondo, or I forgot what it was, when I was 16. So that would be 1971, maybe.
Okay.
And then I went over to fencing when I started at Cal State Fullerton in 1972. I had a great coach. His name was Les Playmaster. He was on the Olympic team, the FA team, and in the Olympics in Japan.
Oh, great.
Superb fencer, far better than I ever suspected. I found that out somewhere down the line when I fenced against him in a tournament. It only took him about 8 seconds to wipe me clean. But, and then from there, with fencing, I started losing my interest in it because of the fact, take my glasses off here, because the fact that the Italians and the French started playing with the thickness of the blades, and it became such that somebody who, I don't know how to turn that bloody thing off, somebody who took a strike or stroke, not thrusted a person, but you could actually flick your foil and it would go over the top. The blade had gotten so bendable and make a point that way. And to me, that did not reflect the fencing of Errol Flynn's, so I lost interest. And I went over, I'm sorry?
The cast. They were calling that casting.
That was casting, okay, the antenna casting. And so I left that and fell into a Japanese martial art. It was called the Japan, it was taught by Yamazaki, Kiyoshi Yamazaki. He was the instructor for the Conan series, which was fun. So I hung around with Arnold and crew for a while.
Was he the little guy that was in the arena teaching Arnold?
What's that?
Was he the guy that was in the arena teaching Arnold and slapping him on the arm?
Absolutely. And also he taught Red Sonja. He was the master in Red Sonja that Red Sonja defeated.
Well, I knew you were old, but I did not know you were
that old. I know. Well, I started very young, Steve. Okay, so I'm just aging well.
Just start calling you Dorian, I think.
Who's Dorian?
Dorian Gray.
Oh, okay.
Holding your age.
So, oh my God. So, in any case, I then practiced that specific Japanese sword system, which was an offshoot of the Setei for some 25 years. And then started over when I got into Syoryu, because Syoryu is a school that was developed in the 1612. It's taught by the 15th headmaster, and he pulls out the manuscripts from the very first masters. Then it's interesting because in the old Japanese schools, you have an owner. It's called a soke. And the soke has the founding documents of the tradition. So imagine having Marozzo's notes.
Wow.
Okay, so he has Marozzo's original notes, and then the second master of the school wrote his own theories and thought processes on what the first master wrote and continued on. And so Soke is the 15th headmaster of the school. So he has access to the original documents, which also, although those are written in Sanskrit, because in that time period, the founder's father was a Shinto priest. And so he had learned how to write in Sanskrit. And I guess a number of the documents, the original documents, Syoryu or Sanskrit, so Soke had to teach him how to self-Sanskrit in order to understand what was written in the documents. And so it's a very interesting tradition. It consists of hand against sword, and then it has the wakizashi, the two-handed sword, naginata, jo staff. And the jo staff of the Syoryu, even though we practiced with wood, was actually, people don't know, the original jo staff was made out of metal in Japan. and it wasn't wood. And so, you know, you don't want to take a piece of wood out in the middle of nowhere and walk along as a priest and have somebody with a samurai sword attack you. They're going to chop it to shreds. And so actually, one of the few extent, I know of it, only of two actually, of the traditional joe staffs that were used by the priests and walking along, exists in the Suyo Hombu. It's called a shakujo. It's about the size, mine goes up to about here. And it's not wood, like I said, it's metal. It tapers from here, it goes about 18 inches down, and it tapers to a point. So when you hit somebody, you were actually stabbing them. It's really fascinating. In any case, so that I got off on the Suyoryu. I've been doing that since 2002, maybe 2001. So.
And you did a lot of trips over to Japan to study with your master there.
Yeah,
right?
and he still says I suck, and that's okay. That's right. I go over there because I need some abuse.
Well, you know, it's like they say, if your instructor thinks you're worth the time, they'll yell at you.
Exactly. In Japan, if they don't think you're not worth anything, they ignore you and hope you go away. It's really true. The more they abuse you, the better you are, or the more possibility you have.
Yeah, not how good you are. It's just you might be able to understand a little bit.
Exactly.
How did you find out about the Fior manuscript? And how did you get in to start studying that?
Well, I ran across a copy of something online in 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. And I noted that there was a little bit of similarity to, I'm going to see if I can turn up my volume real quick. Hold on a second. 8, F8, okay, oh, FN, there we go. Let's see if I can turn this up because I can't hear you. In any case, I ran across a black and white copy of Fior's manuscript. It was from the microfiche that was available. I guess it was taken in the, I don't know when it was taken, but it has the guy with the gloves. You still see the glove hand holding on to the page or the folio as they're taking pictures of it. I don't know how Matt Easton and his crew were able to discern what was written on that thing, but they did a magnificent job in translate or transcribing that manuscript. I don't know how they did it. I'm still amazed. I on my hands and knees to that guy and his wife. I think it was his wife who did that work because it was amazing. But as is my wont, I felt it wasn't good enough because I couldn't read it. So I just went to the Getty and contacted them and started working with them. And I ended up with a copy of the, I actually had, I think, the second copy on, well, PDF and above, JPEGs and TIFF files of the Getty manuscript. And it made a big difference when I got those as to what I was seeing, and that just intrigued me to look at everything about the manuscript itself. And then it just took me on to where I ended up, I got a copy of Flos Dilatorum in my collection, and that got me into wanting to see the original Pisani Dasi, which I was able to do a couple, 3 years ago and photograph it.
Now, I don't see Flos Dilatorum.
I'm sorry?
I know what you're talking about when you say Flos Dilatorum.
Yeah.
But how is that different than the other manuscript you were just talking about at the Getty?
Well, I don't know. I say I don't know because there's a lot of conjectures. Now, I don't talk about my interpretation because interpretation to me means that you've actually calculated out what you think is going on, and that's what's going on in your brain. I'd rather use the terms conjecture, hypothesis, theory, and law. And the only law we have in the scholar at this point in time is we really don't understand Fior. Everybody comes in and says they completely got an understanding, they're out of their minds. But in any case, so the difference between the possibility is, for example, that the Pisani Dasi was written for a left-hander, because the fact that the Senyo, the fellow in the Senyo, has his arms folded opposite to the fellow who's in the Getty. It's really, if you start looking at things, you'll note that if you give a left-hander a blade and try to have them do the guards that are in the, what I'm looking over at the manuscript. I shouldn't do that. I should be looking here. Where was I going with that? Oh, if you give a blade to a left-hander and try to make them do the guards that you see in the Getty, they end up looking like that in Pisani Dasi. And a lot of the actions in the Pisani Dasi are to the left side versus the Gedi, which are to the right side. And the left-hander would go to the left, and the right-hander would go to the right. That's because I got left-handers and right-handers in class, and the Scala. So I don't know. What makes it different? There's a lot of little differences in them. They're about the same size, and it's the Philosophia of Torah is a beautiful manuscript when it's in color. It's just glorious.
Well, I want to get back to that, but before we do that,
Yeah.
you keep mentioning the Scala.
Yeah.
This is Scala San Marco, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that is and what you study?
Sure. Scala San Marco is a school I set up down here in San Diego. Actually, yeah, I just started practicing by myself and ended up having other people join me. Rather than a school, you know, it's a group of people who get together who really appreciate the medieval martial art of Fior. I mean, Fior was probably the last, in my book, the last of the medievalists, as far as using the weapons that he's using compared to what follows. I mean, in 1430, they call out the Udine militia, and 25% are armed with firearms. So you're talking about a different period. We practice all of Fior's art, and from the, almost said naginata, from the spear, poleaxe, two-hander, one-hander, knife work, all the way across the board. So we're always training.
Very cool. Now, just a couple minutes ago, you had mentioned two different words, Flos Delatorum, which is the
Flower Battle.
Flower Battle, and published in 1902 by.
No, that was that. Yeah, that's right. By Francesco Navati.
You also mentioned the Pisani Dasi.
Right.
And you've done a lot of research, and you've been able to meet and work with the people that own that manuscript. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about how you went about finding that manuscript. I mean, the amount of digging you must have had to do.
I wish I could discuss that in detail, but I have made promises to the family not to disclose anything about that.
Okay.
But what I did is I just researched and finally got a hold of, I have a lot of connections in Europe of, as is my wont, I tend to not be shy talking to some people. And when I was in the Napoleonic Society of America, I met up with Napoleon's great, I guess it was grandson, and got connected in with some of the people in Europe. So the families in Europe, when you have a Bonaparte call somebody, it has it causes things to occur. Let's put it that way.
Now, so let's go away from that since we can't talk about it.
Okay, but I can show it.
Oh, well, fantastic.
A little later. Yeah.
You found the Duarte contract, right?
Yeah, I actually didn't. I was, I have a couple of, what I did in order to make sure that I had a correct translation of the manuscript, and I'm not dissing anybody else's work, but I know that there are certain subtle differences between what is written and what was presently then available to us for translational work. Tom Leone was still working on his work. So I hired a couple of PhDs out of Europe to do what I do is I did the translation, sent it to them, and they sent back with all the red marks on it. But I would get back the translation. The guys that I picked were specifically got their PhDs working in the Estin libraries. And so they understood the colloquialisms that were to be seen or used in the time period of the Estin and the Ferraras, and I just want to make sure I was getting as close of a traditional translation as I could get. Correct.
Let me interrupt for the people watching this. Fiore was the sword master for the Duke d'Este. Is that correct?
Marquis.
Marquis.
He wasn't a duke yet. His son became his son paid the money to become a duke.
Okay, so the people that you worked with were working in the libraries of the family that
That's right.
was the sword master for.
That's right.
You don't get much closer than that.
No, well, no, you don't. And that's why I wanted to get exactly what was written versus what people are writing now in the West as far as what was actually written.
And
And there's slight differences. There's some differences that really make a big change on things.
And how did that lead to Duarte?
Well, one of the professors was in the library in Bologna. I believe it was Library Bologna. No, it wasn't. Some of the archives in Italy, in northern Italy, and he wrote me a note and saying, "Hey, I ran across this contract about this sword guy getting a contract with Bologna. Would you have an interest?" And I went, "Yeah." So I sent him some funds, and he translated it for us, and that's what you have available online. Or I think I sent you a copy of it.
You did. It was fascinating how it dictates how much he can charge for students, how much he gets paid for teaching the militia.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's passed around the internet amongst us sword geeks quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that it was an accident, as it were, that it was found.
Indeed. But there's a lot more out there. I'm supposed to, when things settle down in my personal life, I'm supposed to go back to Bologna. There's a couple of things that I think I might know where Duarte's original book is, but we'll leave that alone.
If you need somebody to document your trip,
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Hmm.
So now, how has your study of Japanese swordwork affected your study of Italian swordwork? Or has it gone the other way? Has your Italian...
It's actually gone the other way. At this point in time, it's gone the other way. The one thing I like about Suyo is that the fundamental principle in Suyo is round, is circular motions. And it seems that that is the same thing in Fior, whereas, for example, Meyer is the pivot. So you come to a pivot point, and then from that point, you make a decision. And so no, I'm not a big German guy. So if I make an incorrect statement about the German swordsmanship, I admit it's probably wrong. But, okay. But I see that with most of the guys who are doing German, they come to a certain point, and from that point, they have a decision point. They're going to go around this way, or they're going to pivot, whereas Fior is moving in a round way, as Suyo does. So that's Suyo. That's, I think, in part why I fell in love with Fior. But my problem now is that I'm seeing the one disadvantage to working with an Eastern martial art of an old tradition is that the manuscripts are only available to the owner, to the soke of the school. And you get everything by oral transmission, and only that which he feels you are sufficient to understand. In the case of Fior, I can look at every single drawing that is in any of the works, and I can discern, at least with my limited understanding, what's actually occurring in that, and then that I can't do in Japanese arts. In fact, in the last 6 months, the entire way that I hold my sword in Japanese school has been affected by the way that I see Fior holding his. Yeah. So it's gone east, not west, which is fascinating, because most people have frog DNA coming from Japan going into the US. It's going the exact opposite. It's really fascinating.
So that brings up another question I have. Is one of the things that you and I have talked about is the artwork in the illustrations of Fior. What makes that artwork so special and it's so important?
If you really pay attention to what's going on in the manuscript, it blows you away. I'll explain that in a second. As far as the artwork, first off, the Getty has at least 30 to 35 corrections in the drawings. Now, if this was a one-off, who would go through and correct it? I'm sorry?
What were they correcting?
The drawings. For example, the very first drawing in there of Abrazari, the crown was on the wrong head, so they had to move it. The hands of the attacker and the first dagger master has been redrawn. The hands in the cross of the second master were redrawn. The left hand on the third play of the first remedy master, Mazama Ligadura, which is this big in the manuscript, was scraped and redrawn. Because if you hold it one way, the play doesn't work. If you hold another, it does.
So there's no mistakes in there. They were very specific about the artwork that they used,
Yeah.
and how the fingers show, and they went to the expense of scraping off vellum because it wasn't written on parchment; it was on
No. Yeah.
and then scrape it off and then redraw it.
Correct. Now you can redraw on vellum up to 14 times depending upon the quality of the vellum. Just for future reference for those who do pay attention to looking at the writing, I'm sure everybody does. I don't mean that negatively, but when you look, you'll see that if there's a mistake made, okay, they cannot scrape the written part. The pen they're using is too thick. Just use return pen. Okay, the quill they're using is too thick. The line and the ink is too thick to scrape. Because if you go through and try to redraw it, it'll blot out. So what they did when they wrote these manuscripts, and this is true in all manuscripts, is that if somebody was writing and they got partway through a word and it was wrong, they'd put a double line through it. If on the other hand, they completed the word and wrote it all out and they went, oh, crud, they would draw a line under it. So I know in one manuscript somewhere, I don't know where it was, where it says scholar, the second scholar is underlined. It means it was written incorrectly and should not be there.
So the underline is ignore this part.
That's right. It's a wrong word, or it's been whatever. Just ignore it. It's not there. They don't scrape. They don't draw it out. They underline it.
And we see that in the Fiore manuscript as well.
Yeah, it's double underlined. Actually, I think it's double underlined. So yeah,
Wow.
I have to remember all this. It's been a while.
So talking to you and visiting you, I've had the opportunity to see some of your collection. And you've been collecting original manuscripts for a little while now, right?
Indeed so.
What do you have in your library?
Oh, God.
Not just a general.
My oldest book is from 1476. It's the 1476, 1478. It's the third printing of Flavius Vegetius's De Re Militaire. The first printing was done in Venice in, I think, 1474. Second was Rome, and third was in Paris. So I've got the Parisian version. As far as fencing goes, I've got El Poeto's Duello del Rey, which is the rules of fighting, which is really interesting. There was a guy who went and looked at tons of different materials, ecclesiastical writings, judicial writings, and he created a book that said, okay, this is how the rules of fighting go. Who can fight who can do what rank can you challenge against, who can't challenge who. And on top of that, he then went along and used numerous examples of duels, of judicial duels, for example. And in fact, in one of those, he references specifically, I think it's book 10, chapter 8, or book 8, chapter 10, I forget which one, where he references specifically that in one particular battle, it was in the 1380s, it was in Lombardy, that two fellows walked in with pole axes and had, of course, arming sword on the side. Then all of a sudden, one guy took a swing and powder came out of the top of his pole axe and blinded the other guy. And then a big argument broke out between the jury as to whether or not that violated the ancient laws of Lombardy, because it was a secret weapon brought into the judicial duel. And so Fior I've had for years, people said, oh, that's just fake. Didn't have anything like that with powder coming out of the poleaxe head, which Fior shows in his manuscript, in both of them, as a matter of fact, at least two of them. I don't know. I can barely make out the Morgan, but in both PD and the Getty. It's there. And they say, oh, that was fake. No, it really existed, because here's the guy writing about it. So then I've got that book, and then it goes on to, okay, Morozzo's in there, Fiore's in there. I've got Thibault. Let's see. Capoferro. Oh, crud. Oliver, Angelo. All the big masters are in my collection at this point in time.
And yet, one of the things I always enjoy hearing you talk about is you've got what you call your Princess Bride library.
Absolutely. Well, Bonetti's, in the Princess Bride, you have that fencing scene where you have, oh, I see you using Bonetti as defense against me. Well, I thought it appropriate considering the train or however it goes. I thought Capo, and then he says I use Capoferro, and then he says, oh, well, unless you fought with your Thibault, which I, and then somehow, I don't have it correct, but he mentions Capoferro, then Thibault, and then Agrippa, right? Well, I always tell you that the reason why Inigo Montoya lost is because he had the 1603 edition of Agrippa and not the original. Because if you look at the 1603 edition versus the original, there's fundamental differences in the drawing qualities. And so if somebody looks at the 1603, it doesn't look, in my eyes, anything like the 1553. And I've got both, and I can put them side to side and show them to you. There's a lot of books from the 1600s, a lot of books from the 1500s. I have a few from the 1700s, and I've got a couple from the 1800s.
So that actually brings up a question I had. A lot of people, when they're talking about these old books, they're under the impression that the artists didn't know how to use perspective in their artwork.
Okay.
Do you find perspective in the artwork?
In every single piece. I don't know how to describe it, or what I know how to describe it. I don't know how to explain it. In the originals, for some odd reason, there is depth that can actually be seen, whereas on a photographic copy of that same work, that's gone. For some odd reason, photography, no matter how great it is, flattens the drawings. So when I look at, I know that for a fact because it was interesting. We had a Fiore event a few years back at the Getty, and one of the guys in the class walked in. They had the Getty on display, and he said OMFG in this whole big hall because he noticed how much difference there was and how much depth there was in looking at the original versus looking at a copy. And I know that you folks had it up there for a little bit in the Legionnaire Museum.
Yeah, yeah. And the way, the depth, but also the gold leaf, the way it leaps off the page.
It's unbelievable. When you're sitting at the Getty and you open up, I've had chances to do that, go through it, and the lights coming through the window, it glows. There's no way to describe it. It's just beautiful.
How big is that manuscript?
I'm sorry?
How big is the Fiore manuscript?
Oh, it's do I have it here? It's about getting big. Because I made a copy of it at the same size as the book. So it's about this big.
The size,
I'm sorry?
Something that'll fit easily in your saddlebags?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the curators at the Getty said, look, the reason why there were, and this is pure postulation on her part, the reason why there were 3 manuscripts written because there were 3 sons of D'Este. And one was made for each, and they would fit in a saddlebag, which I thought was interesting. I never heard that one before, but who can say she's right? Who can say she's wrong? She just threw it out. She said, maybe. The one thing I like about museum curators particularly is they say maybe, unless they absolutely know something specific, it's 99% possible. You know, our theory is. So.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's always nice to say, you know, here's what we think, but we don't know for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things I've talked to you about that I always found interesting is when you're looking at the artwork, the way the quillins are different sizes.
Oh, absolutely.
The legs are different sizes.
Absolutely.
Why do they draw it like that?
That's because if you look at the original, you'll see the perspective where the leg, for example, what I'm working on right now is the guards of Fior in the Getty, and it is different than most everybody is presently performing it, and it's not their fault. I'll start right there, okay? The problem is that it's the flattening effect that we just talked about. For example, if you look at, let's say, let me pull this up, and I'll pull it up. Okay. If you look at, now I've got some lines in it. This is my working copy, okay? But you can see, I believe, I gotta make sure I can get that. Okay, there you go, okay? Now, if you look at the back leg is actually not on the same, it's almost on the same line. The toes here, almost the same line as front foot. So he's not standing this way, he's standing this way. And when you do this, it changes everything. In fact, I think I sent you a video on Facebook about taking one of the guards. I think it was Mizana Portaferro. And if you, I did the guard the way I see it drawn in the manuscript with the proper perspective. And then I had Alex swing around me. And by the time it got done, it looked exactly as drawn. It looked exactly like this. Yet this blade, my blade, when I did it, was sticking out this direction, which is the same way it is in Von Danzig. If you look at the Von Danzig manuscript in, I guess it's called Albert, you can tell how much German I know. It hangs off that way. It doesn't hang this way. It hangs off that way. Yeah, so it's really fascinating to look at the perspective and try to, I'm working on a different thought process than I used to.
That's why we call it study, right? We're always changing.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's really interesting that there's so much to learn. My wife is, as you know, Kathy likes her ice. And so one day I'm looking through the manuscript. My question is now, it's not what are they doing, it's why are they doing it? Why does this work? Not just what. And I looked at, for example, here, okay? Now look at the first master. And you look at the hand, I don't know if you can see it clearly or not, but you look at this person's hand, okay? Descending blow, and the way they're holding their blade is they're not holding their blade this way. They're holding their blade this way. And I went, what the heck is that all about? Okay, so since I have a tendency to stab ice with an ice pick, I tried stabbing it this way, and I can literally take a blade and I take this and I push it down and I can feel the weakness here. But if I hold my fingers this way, that disappears. It's completely gone. It's because there's a bone right here that rotates into an open spot. I forgot, I don't know what the bone's called, in any case. So it rotates in here and it stops the motion of the entire hand. And therefore, ultimately what happens is that all the pressure ends up going to the arm instead of, it's muscular. It changes the entire structure of everything. And you wouldn't think that this would do it. But I showed you, you know, if you hold your hands this way, somebody push it down. If you do this, they can't move you. They literally cannot push you down, right? And where'd that come from? That came from looking at this fellow here, because those hands were redrawn. Now I've gone through and on some of these I've traced over the top, but if you look at his hands and look at his fingers, you've got one like this. I'm like, why in the heck does he have his hand drawn like this? I mean, that was scraped and redrawn. So if it was scraped and redrawn, it was drawn correctly. If it was drawn incorrectly, it could have scraped it again, but they didn't. And it's drawn this way, all right? Now, why in the heck would you have your finger down like that? It changes the entire structure of the body up the shoulder. It adds 1000% strength to become this way versus coming this way. And you wouldn't think it's true, but it's just the way it is.
To go back to the beginnings of the grappling section, with the longa and bicornio, where the palm is flat. And so how that changes everything.
Yeah, I do it this way with the backhand. You mean like this, the backhand versus this? Yeah, if you do this, what it does is stretches all these tendons, pulls this down, and what it does is it tightens up the back versus having your hand down, which loosens this, which changes the entire structure.
Their understanding of biomechanics is just amazing. What they were
I'll tell you what, it's all coming from this.
Yeah.
I swear to God, it's all coming from this. It's not from personal study. It's just from the fact that I go, okay, why is he doing this? These people, you know, the same handhold, this same thing. Go look at Marozzo. I was talking to Sarah Murphy, one of your students, and we were talking about Marozzo, and she said, "Oh my gosh, in Marozzo, in every single play, he's like this. He doesn't have it like this. He's got it like this.
Doing the same thing.
He's doing, or he's got it like this, which works. He just doesn't have it here. See, if I have it here, that bone's locked. If I go here, that bone's open. And then see how much rotation I've got here? I put my thumb here. That's as far as I can go back. I put my thumb. I go back here.
That brings up a really neat thing that we see in pugilism manuscripts. The pugilists, when they make a fist, they put their thumb on top, whereas modern fighters put their thumb down.
The what fighters?
Modern fighters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas
this makes a single piece. You're right.
Yeah.
I mean, all you have to do is just look at these people. Look at you know, I don't understand why. As Titus Ricardus once said, this stuff is not inspirational; it's instructional.
Yeah.
And if it's instructional, you have to assume that it's drawn correctly, not incorrectly. It's not for me to go through and say, okay, this is wrong. This doesn't work. This isn't drawn quite right. No, no. You have to start with the assumption that it's all correct, and that what you know, what you think you know, is subject to question. Always question.
That actually brings me up to another question is, we have manuscripts and we have manuals. And
we have what? Manuals?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like the Pisani Dasi does not give you instructions, but it's got some fantastic smack talk.
Absolutely.
Whereas the Getty actually gives you instructions, and I believe it does as well.
Right.
But the Pisani Dasi and the Florius just give you a couple of lines, like what we
correct.
Body as well. How many of these old manuscripts are actually to just jog your memory versus being a manual, a how-to, if you will?
I don't know. If you ask, I mean, as far as the Italian works, I don't know much in the way of the German works. It's because it's not in the same wheelhouse as far as the fundamental principle. So, you know, I can't be, I don't look at the German manuscripts to figure out how to cut in Fior's manuscript because they're doing different work. I can't answer that question. I mean, I know that Morgan was instructional because it is almost the exact duplicate of the Getty, or vice versa. I don't know which one was first, actually. I think that the Morgan's missing pages, though. And the reason I say that is if you look at the bottom of the Morgan, it has like page 158, 159, 160. It was in a book of 5 different manuscripts owned by a senator in Venice in 1720 and was pulled apart and put into separate bits sometime later. And I don't know whether all the bits of Fior ended up in the right book or not. And I don't know where the other 4 are.
Wow.
I haven't found any of the books. So there's at least 4 other manuscripts out there that nobody knows about, or were destroyed in the war or something. I don't know.
Tell us about the Florius. Why the Florius?
Okay.
Why is that so different than the other manuscripts?
Well, you've got some people. I'm trying to remember the professor, a real good guy back east who's been working on it. Where his one is that I believe it says that Fior is dead. Number 2, so it was written after Fior had died. It was partly created after Fior was dead. So, Fior had died. So I don't know exactly how much interplay there is between Florius and the Getty and the other. I don't know. I do look at the Florius. It's very interesting. It has a lot of plays in there that are fascinating. It does somewhat compare with the earlier manuscripts, but I tend to stay with that which I know was most likely created by Fior.
And just for people watching this, the Florius is a Latin version of the manuscript that's in the Bibliothèque Nationale. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a beautiful work too. I call it Glorious Florius.
It is lovely. It actually has one of my favorite half-swording guards, which is the one where the sword is resting in the crook of your arm,
Mm-hmm.
and you're grasping your dagger in your belt. I love
I
that.
like that one.
I wanted to ask you also, and my last question for you is your study into Thibault.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit about your study into Thibault and how that's helping you understand fencing theory and how that might cross over into other things that you're doing.
Thibault is a very interesting, interesting work. I do have an original, which really helps a lot because I don't, now I can open it up and you can see depth. Again, for some odd reason, even the printed books have depth that you don't see in the prints. I don't understand. I mean, I've got big, huge prints of this thing, high quality, high res that I took. My Flow to the Torum copy, I have 54 megabyte pictures of each page, each folio, but yet it doesn't look the same. In any case, so fencing theory. I know that Thibault is, God, that's so hard because Thibault is so interesting. I mean, up on the wall over here.
Yeah, while you want to, I had the opportunity to see your manuscript, and for those that have never seen the original manuscript,
Not that I want to look at it all the time, but this is up on the wall, just so I can see that.
and Thibault, if I remember correctly, weighs
25 pounds.
how much?
25 pounds.
A 25-pound book.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And it's 20 by, I mean, it's 20 by 30. It's a huge thing. And, you know, the one thing about Thibault particularly that I really appreciate is there's no interpreting Thibault.
What do you mean?
He says, move this to here, move that to here, move this to there, move this to there, do exactly this. Now, there is questions as to what he means by demi-flores and the like because of dancing. Those are dancing terms because in the old days, I know that it was the Portuguese king, he wrote Riding Every Saddle. He talked about the three things that a gentleman had to know, which was horseback riding, fencing, and dancing. So dancing was always intertwined with the sword work. And Thibault does reference it. So we've had to go to orchesography and a couple of other books that specifically deal with dancing of the period. So we can try to figure out exactly what he's meaning on that. But other than that, that circle with all the lines in it and the numbers, and he says exactly put your foot here. In fact, in one of the chapters, I think it's actually it's table 4, circle 3. He writes that this person was drawn in the wrong location because it was drawn right. You wouldn't be able to see the correct position. He actually moved somebody aside so you could see something behind it. As far as fencing theory, I'm not that adept to be able to talk about fencing theory relative to the Italian methodologies, even though I have a lot of Italian fencing manuscripts. But I'm just trying to work my way through Thibault. So, and I can't give you great information on his fencing theory because I can't figure it. Well, we're getting through it, but it's very detailed.
What do you like about working with Thibault?
What do I like working about? There is no question. He shows you exactly how to move. Now, what's interesting about Thibault, as an aside, is you really, and it points out why you have to put yourself in the time period. I have a couple of floors. I made them out exactly as he said to make them. And for some odd reason, every time we'd start with the foot line and the, you know, we have your feet just right and you come up and you step over here to do the move, we were always 2 inches short. So the guy who's teaching it, his name's Tide Richards, decided to go and put on some shoes that had the same silhouette as Thibault did. And he found he used jazz dancing shoes. You get some jazz dancing shoes, really cheap ones that slide on your feet. And I'll be danged if the heel this much, when you lifted your foot, you stepped over, we landed every time where we were supposed to land. You wouldn't think that your shoe with this much sole and that much heel would make that much distance on you. I still haven't figured out why. Without even thinking about it, it happened. So one of the things you really have to do, yeah, I believe, in order to understand any of these, whatever you're studying, is you really need to put yourself in the time frame, at least with shoes, particularly, because it will have an impact on how you recreate the rest of the motion. You don't know how little of a move can affect the entire, I mean, a little motion can affect the entire move, if that makes sense.
We've talked about how modern shoes have heels. Even tin shoes have a little lift at the back, where in the medieval period they didn't have that.
No.
It's going to affect how you move.
Absolutely. Well, the Thibault experiment proved it to me. I didn't expect that. I went, okay, Tide, I'll get some. So I pick up these shoes, put them on, get on the floor first time, and I step and I look down, and I'm in the perfect spot. And I've never made it to the perfect spot without trying to push myself over there. Without having to do it, I stepped in the perfect spot. And I went, okay, there's something to this. There's something in the body that is moved by that heel that's about that big. Because you look at his shoes, right? He's got a heel about this big, and the sole's about this thick, all right? So he's got a heel this, and for some odd reason, it pushes another 2 inches. It's crazy. So,
when was Thibault published?
1628. He started when it was about 1621, 1622, went to 1628. There's a lot of individual plates still floating around. Yeah, I know that when he died, he was working on a second book, or was going to work on a second book. He talks about it. And a lot of the pages that were printed, I mean, it took the King of France and half a dozen other major nobles to pay for the darn thing. It was printed at twice the size of any previous book. Therefore, they had to create all new printing presses. And not just that, they had to make a whole new system making the copper plates. And then they went to these amazing engravers. And I believe it took a year and a half to make a plate.
One plate?
Yeah, because what they have to do first is he draws it, right? And he has to come through and correct it. Then they have to, when they finally make the plate, they have to do it backwards.
Yeah.
Right? So when it prints, it comes up. It's crazy to think about the fact that in fact, that's true with all tapestries. When they do tapestries, they put it on the back, they put it on the front backwards. So when it comes out the right direction. It's right facing. It's really crazy. But they literally had to do that. And this copper plate's 30 by 20. And this guy's going, ding, 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 ding. I mean, the marks are like, some of them are the size of periods at 12-point Helvetica. I mean, it just little, and these people spent years working on this. And I don't know how many copper plates got thrown out. What?
That tells us how important fencing was in that whole society. Just
absolutely.
The Marquis d'Este, how he
absolutely
Fiore, and then paid to have these books done.
Well, there's some people with theories that perhaps the Fior the Getty was actually created for Niccolo at the behest of some other noble like the Duke of Mantua, or just to give. See, the Marquis Ferrara was a major center in Italy when there was a schism between the two popes. There were two popes at more than once in Italy, right? It was settled in Ferrara.
Oh, okay.
So the Duke was the Captain General of the Venetian army, the Papal army. So he was no slob. I mean, that's why I look at this, the Getty, and saying, wait a minute, this guy's going to be given a book. The Captain General of the Papal army is going to be given a book or a manuscript on medieval fighting. I think he'll know what he's looking at.
Right, yeah.
And it's not for me to question what I'm looking at. It's for me to figure out what I'm looking at.
I want to thank you for taking all your time to
Sure.
sit down and talk with me.
Just a quick thing.
Yeah.
That's what the Fasani Daci looks like. There's the gold. See it?
Yeah. So that's a high-resolution photocopy of the original manuscript.
That's correct. The only one in existence.
Okay. Hey, have you ever heard of an author called Christian Cameron?
No.
Just curious. He's done it's a historical fiction, and it's got Fiore in it.
I've heard about the book.
Yeah, The Ill-Made Knight. A lot of fun to read. And
Oh, do it.
Fior in this book is just an amazing fencer, but has no people skills.
I can understand why.
He's so in his head that he just doesn't understand. You know, it's like any, or not like any, but it's like this epitome of the complete and perfect artist that doesn't fit in regular people's society.
Like Leonardo.
Yeah, it just doesn't get modern intercommunication.
Yeah.
So, Brian, I want to thank you for your time.
I've got some, I write once in a while some works for the Scala. If anybody has an interest in reading some of the things we're writing, some of the newsletters, you're welcome to it.
Fantastic.
So just contact me.
I'm going to put all the contact information into the description of the video as well. So that way they can read it at the beginning too.
And I don't mind if anybody wants to come and view the library.
That's very generous of you. That's one of the things I've always appreciated, is just how generous you are with knowledge and with your hard work, your hard-earned knowledge. You're willing to give it away.
Sure. That's what teaching is all about.
And that's why I so appreciate having any opportunity I can to talk to you in person or over the internet and study with you. Like I said, you're the one I consider my Fiore teacher.
Well, when we get over this whole coronavirus thing, I'll come up to your school for a day and we'll have some fun.
I would love that. So I'm going to go ahead and close down now, but thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and hear from you and hear about what you know.
Call me anytime you want to.
All right. So Brian Stokes, thanks very much for joining me at the Pandemic Interviews. Have a wonderful day.
And everybody stay safe.
Yes. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Right. Try to maintain your sanity.